Okay, folks, today we're going to talk about economic systems. And to do that, you have to kind of understand, first of all, what the heck economic systems are. And they're basically how all the money and business and satisfying wants and needs of a society, this is the study of all that. So every society has to answer these basic questions. First of all, how do we produce and distribute goods and services? How to use the resources that we have to satisfy wants and needs, and then how to use resources, including labor and capital, which is money, to meet economic needs. Okay, so the first and probably most famous and widespread of these systems is capitalism. Begins with the commercial revolution of the 1500s, the advent of trade in Europe. In 1776, a man named Adam Smith, who we will spend a little time on, wrote a book called The Wealth of Nations. And in this, he stated that the means of production and distribution of goods and services are determined or controlled by the people in the marketplace. Okay, means of production is how we make everything and distribute everything. This is called a market economy or the free enterprise system. Supply of goods and services is affected by the demand for goods and services. Businesses will make as much as people want, provided that they can profit by it. The price of goods and services is determined by the supply and demand. Okay? Cornerstones of capitalism are self-interest and individual initiative. People doing what's good for them and taking the initiative to better themselves. The means of production are privately owned and controlled. There's no government ownership. You are allowed to make a profit as an incentive to work to your maximum ability. You're allowed to compete with other businesses. Individuals are free to choose their work and or business options. Capitalists advocate for laissez-faire economics. Government keeps its hands off. It doesn't interfere with the businesses. Capitalists are actually anti-mercantilists. Even though a lot of them made a ton of money off the mercantile system, they were anti it because it was way too government regulated for their tastes. Okay. Some other things that came out of this that lead to a bunch of other economic theories, or maybe even just the watering down of capitalism. One of the early ones is called social Darwinism. What it is you took the ideas of Darwin's theory of evolution and you apply it to business. Okay, Darwin said that the number of offspring will increase versus the food supply. Only the fittest will survive. You take this and you apply this into the business world. Another competing philosophy was socialism. This concentrated more on society than the individual. Socialists claimed that industrial capitalism had caused a large gap between rich and poor. Under socialism, farms and businesses belong to the people, not individuals. Utopian Socialism says all property and work would be shared. Since it would be equal, fighting would end. In Scotland, a guy named Robert Owen set up a utopian factory community, and these things popped up all over the place during the 19th century, and still occasionally today. Then you have Marxist Socialism. Okay, Marxist Socialism says in 1848, two Germans, Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels, explained a more radical theory called scientific socialism in their book, The Communist Manifesto, which we will also spend a little time on. Here are some of their thoughts. History was a class struggle between wealthy capitalists and the working class proletariat. In order to make profits, capitalists took advantage of the proletariat. The proletariat would eventually rise up and overthrow the capitalists, and a proletariat society would take control of the means of production and establish a classless communist society in which everything would be shared equally. Okay, in communism, all economic decisions are made by the ruling government. Communist economies are by a central planning committee. They are authoritarian. There's no private ownership. Everything is owned by the state. There's no competition. Prices are regulated by the state. There's no profit allowed. And it leads to little or no choice. This is known as a command economy, where the government dictates what's going to be sold, what's going to be manufactured. Okay, a little bit more on Marxism and communism. It develops in a response to the terrible factory and living conditions that we've been looking at in class and the exploitation of workers during the early Industrial Revolution. It was a reaction to the excesses of capitalism, so it came in as kind of a counterweight. Okay, Marx believed in an economic interpretation of history. Said the history of all hitherto or existing or previous society is the history of class struggle. He talked about a conflict between economic classes. You had the haves and the have-nots. And here's the different ways he brought it out. Eventually to the bottom there where you got to the bourgeoisie, which was the capital, the proletariat, which were the workers. Okay. Marx believed that the root of the problems of the Industrial Revolution could be found in the theory of surplus value or profit. Bourgeoisie capitalists were hungry for profits to pay workers and at subsistent levels, but sell goods at a high price. The price of goods minus the cost of the labor and materials, the difference between those two is your surplus value or your profit. Okay. Marx believed in the inevitability of revolution of the proletariat over the bourgeoisie because the conditions would continue to worsen. It would be kind of what is nowadays called a race to the bottom. The rich get richer, the poor get poorer. Capitalism would be replaced by Marxism and capitalism. He believed in collectivism was more important than individual initiative, working together for the greater good. The group was more important than the individual. He believed that after the revolution, government would eventually wither away and there would be a dictatorship of the proletariat, meaning the people would run everything. He believed that in the ultimate communist society, from each according to his ability to each according to his needs. Workers of the world unite. You have nothing to lose but your chains. These are all statements from the Communist Manifesto. Okay. Then you had socialism, which is kind of a cross between the two. Means of production of the goods and services are controlled and or owned by the government. So it's often a heavy regulation. Government regulates or sometimes owns businesses, industries, farms, transportation, communication. The government is involved in and supports economically social problems. So there's welfare, there's Social Security, Medicare. Those are examples of that. Private ownership is either limited or banned. Supply and demand are controlled by the government. Prices are controlled by the government. Some key words here are social engineering, government regulation, and ownership control. Okay, Utopian Socialists, and this is a model that popped up all over the place in the 19th century, tried to develop a perfect society. That is what a utopia is. Model communities are set up. They eventually failed. You had Christian socialists who came around. They based their brand of socialism on the golden rule. They attempted to overcome poverty, misery, hunger, disease, ignorance through government-sponsored Christian principles, the brotherhood of man. So it was trying to have government influence the end of poverty and hunger and disease. Okay, social Darwinism kind of was almost a response to this. All forms of life developed from earlier forms. In every case, the fittest survived and the weak died out. It is the same for people and nations. It was believed that some people are superior to others. Examples: Europeans versus Africans in the 19th century, imperialism, the white man's burden, and slavery all came out of this. Then you had the Nazis and the Jews in the 30s and 40s. And finally, it still played out in Bosnia with ethnic cleansing back in the 90s. Okay, so there will be a Google form that you're going to need to complete. So look for that on Google Classroom.